Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Mind, Your Reality, Your Results. We are a weekly LinkedIn live show where every week I meet with an expert in a various field to discuss topics that will influence your mindset, therefore leading to the amazing results that you want. I would love for you guys to engage with us. Please ask comments, ask questions. Feel free to reach out to either myself or Mark at the end of this because we would love to stay in contact. And that includes, even if you're watching this after it's live, please feel free to post those comments and questions and we'd love to get back to you. If you don't know me, my name is Leah Fink and I run All Thrive. We offer amazing and engaging workshops that focus on a variety of personal development and mental health pieces. And you can find out more about that at allthrive.ca, which I'll also put in the chat. And I am so pleased today to welcome Mark to the show. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Leah. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, so why don't we start out? Because I'm guessing that most of my people don't know you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. My name is Mark Walker. You will find me as Robert Walker online because that's how they license me. My name is Robert Walker. So it's a little confusing. I'm an independent advisor with Sun Life Insurance. Basically working with people for insurance needs and investment, wealth, RSP, retirement and estate planning, that sort of thing. Coming to the financial industry a little late in life, after spending about 40 years in the business world, primarily newspaper publishing and digital media. So a fairly broad business background. And I'd always been interested in things like personal financial planning and insurance, and really, I think we talked about this when we first met, Leah. My first motivation into understanding the entire insurance side of the business was when my father passed away at 57, and I was 30, and he didn't have any insurance. He didn't really have a financial plan. And it was not devastating to my mother and my family. I was old enough and on my own, but it certainly, the lack of preparation made life harder for my mom than I think it needed to be, and pushed me in a direction where I thought, if you do a little bit of planning, a little bit of preparation early on in life, or as soon as you can, if you're a little bit later in life, it just makes life so much easier, so much simpler, and takes away one of the largest stress points I think people have in their life, and that's financial worry. So many people are living paycheck to paycheck, don't have they don't know what it's like really to have financial peace of mind. And it's something that, of so many of the things that can impact your life, your ability to manage and plan for your financial future and make sure that you're secure is really one of the easiest and simplest things that we have. And yet it's one of the things that so many people just always put off. It's like getting a will. I'll get around to it, right? So that's what motivated me to get involved in the business, was to perhaps offer some advice, expertise, and direction around gaining a financial peace of mind that a lot of people just seem to have a real challenge gaining on their own.
Awesome. Well, I love your perspective. I am just going to mention thank you to, I can't see your name, but someone mentioned they're having a bit of trouble hearing you.
Oh, okay.
So if you can maybe, if you can come forward a little bit, that might help, just to make sure that everyone, because it kind of defeats the purpose if we can't hear you. So thank you for mentioning that. So what I really loved when we talked, Mark, because one of my passions is really proactive mental health, and taking the time before you think there's a problem to really dive into that and to understand those concepts and to do the work, as it were. And when we were talking the first time, you spoke about finance the same kind of way. So would you like to explain kind of what financial health means to you, or what that proactive financial health means?
Well, I think we all have, at the end of the day, we all have one goal, and that goal is to spend our money. We work hard all our lives. We want to put something aside. You can talk about saving for a house or saving for a car, but really at the end of the day, what you want to do is accumulate as much money as you can, because you want to enjoy that money. So if you can think of that as kind of the primary objective that people have, then having some kind of a strategy in place to both make sure that you're able to continue to earn money and protect what you already have is really foundational to making sure that you're able to have financial peace of mind. And there's lots and lots of ways for different strategies that people can use um, to secure their financial future. One, there's a fellow who made a fair amount of money. I think he's one of the dragons. And he's a wealthy barber, which was an interesting book because the Wealthy Barber book is effectively the same formula of a book called The Richest Man in Babylon. I remember my grandfather showed me when I was 10 years old. And a very straightforward, simple way to just basically say you save 10% of everything you bring home, put 20% of everything you have against debt, and spend the rest. And if you do that over your lifetime, you'll eventually, according to The Richest Man in Babylon and The Wealthy Barber, wind up with a nice little nest egg and live a comfortable life that's effectively debt-free. Unfortunately, a lot of people have a real problem with the putting the 10% to themselves, paying themselves first, making sure that they're taken care of first. And oftentimes they've spent more than the 70% of their earnings on living, and they don't have the 20% to put down against debt. And so just simple little tactics and strategies that people can put in place to make sure that they are not unnecessarily putting themselves into financial stress, which then leads to all kinds of other emotional issues. Because if you're constantly worried about money, if you're constantly worried about debt, if you're constantly worried about sort of what happens if you lose your next paycheck, all of the other aspects of your life are going to be negatively impacted. So, as we talked about earlier, I think it's absolutely essential that people work to put a plan together to make sure that of the few things that they can control in their lives, their financial situation is one of them. So control that first, get that straightened away. All of the other stuff at that point then becomes a little easier, at least to deal with and maybe solve if there are other issues out there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and it is so important that we are looking at those pieces ahead of time. And one thing that stood out to me, and I'm really curious of your perspective on this, when I look at my generation, maybe compared to yours, I think there might be a different generation here. When my parents bought a house in Calgary, their house was basically 1 year's salary. So if you look at paying that back over a series of years, it becomes very affordable. It becomes possible to easily live under that 70% of your money's going into living expenses, if not less. And, when I look at me and my partner purchasing a house, it is many years of salary. And that's obviously with interest and all those pieces. And just the way that the economy and, maybe salaries haven't risen with inflation and pieces like that. Do you recommend different things for people now to kind of support that they just might have a very low salary? Like if someone comes to you and says, I make $40,000 a year, what do I do?
Well, there's a certain amount of living within your means that
Totally.
I think needs to be. People really need to have a hard look at that. I think one of the negative aspects of this super low interest rate environment we've had for the last it's almost 2 decades now is that people have become comfortable borrowing a fair amount of money to buy a house, for example. And in many respects, people are realistically overextended. If you're thinking about wanting to save money for the future as well as live in the have a good life now. So I mean, I think people really need to put some thought behind how big a house they're buying, how much they're spending on a house, where the house is. I mean, you and I are meeting remotely. We all know that not in sort of it was happening well before COVID, but certainly the COVID accelerated the whole idea of remote learning, and it's absolutely had an impact on, for example, housing prices in places that aren't big cities. But still, there are affordable places to live, and you don't need to borrow, $500,000 from your mom and dad and another $1 million from the bank to buy the house that you want in the neighborhood that you want in Calgary, if you want to actually do some objective analysis of where you are and say, hey, maybe we can get away with borrowing $500,000 from mom and dad and living in Olds or something. I'm not sure what works, but that's kind of an issue that I think a lot of people have. And but one of the things that makes it difficult to use that sort of 10-20-70 rule is the fact that money has become so easy. People are seeing that it's an opportunity to borrow more to buy more, take on more debt. It becomes very difficult to service with that 20% rule. And the other thing is, if it's easy to get a $750,000 or $800,000 mortgage for a home, and it's happening all throughout the market, the house price of houses is necessarily going to go up. So, you have to determine whether you want to play that game. Are you really interested in getting into that sort of hamster wheel of servicing debt because it's cheap, and so it doesn't look like it has that much impact on it. I think another thing that is really not well understood or perhaps appreciated by so many people is the impact that taxes have.
That which, sir?
Taxes.
Yeah.
You were saying that when your mom and dad bought their first house in Calgary, my mom and dad bought their first house in Calgary in 1963, and it was a fairly similar kind of a situation at the time. My father was making good money working in the oil business and pipeline business in Calgary, and I think we bought it. The house was $20,000, and I think he was making $14,000 at the time.
Yeah.
But the effective tax rate that they had, total tax rate, municipal, federal, and provincial, was about 13%. And now the real tax rate that most people are faced with, provincial, federal, and municipal, oftentimes can be as much as 40 to 45% of their income.
Wow. So
anything that people can do to reduce the impact that taxes are going to have on their income. And we have RSPs in Canada, which some people are for them, some people are not. For the vast majority of people, the easiest way to reduce your tax burden is to basically utilize the tax breaks that are in the RSP contributions to save money, to save that 10% away, and then have a little bit of money come back so that you can either have 10% to pay yourself or have a little bit tomorrow to live on. So those are all sort of issues that people really don't pay attention to. The other thing that people don't pay attention to, I think, is inflation.
Sorry?
People don't pay attention to inflation. And
yes.
Even if the official inflation rate does not include housing and food and energy, right?
Yeah.
So we all know that gasoline costs way more than it did, and we all know that groceries are going through the roof. And so the government and the media tells you, though, inflation is low, it's 2%, it's 1.5%, but that's not really the case. And the impact that has on your budget are sort of one of those hidden costs, those hidden things that really cause people not to have as much money as they thought they had or as they wished they'd had. And again, that starts to lead to these issues where people are stressed about money, stressed about their financial future. So it's interesting. We do have a tool now. I'm right at the outset, I'm not a financial planner. I'm an advisor, but we do have tools, and most financial institutions have tools, and they can work with people to put together a financial plan. And it's always surprising to me when you do off the top of the head budget with people and try to identify their cash flow, how much most people underestimate what they spend each month. They know what their mortgage is, and they know what their house insurance is, but people really have a really poor handle on how much they're spending on incidentals. How much do they spend on entertainment? Really? How much do they really spend on food? How much do they really spend on this and that? It's often we often come to a place in our discussion where after we put the cash flow together and you show people what they say they've spent and how much money they should have left at the end of the month, and they go, wait a minute, we don't have any money left at the end of the month. I said, well, let's go back and have a look at what you've identified you spend on. So, just nobody likes to budget. Budget's a dirty word. People resist it, but it never hurts just to have an objective look on how much is coming in, how much is going out, and identify sort of what you could change in that just to make your life a little bit easier so you can sleep better at night. Right?
Yeah. And what I'm hearing in that, I mean, there's a piece too that everyone should have some form of financial advisor here, right? Like I appreciate what they do in banks, and I also think there's lots of other options for people. But having someone that you're checking in with who's asking these questions, who's asking what you're trying to do, what you're putting away, and everyone here can go home right now and actually look at their statements for the past couple months and say, oh, realistically, this is what I've spent on this. I think you're totally right there that I probably don't know all of my purchases, even in COVID, where they've been a bit different.
And things like automatic withdrawals or debit from your bank account, or attaching bills to your credit card, subscribing to things online. They become these. They go in the background. You never see them. But have a look at your credit card statement sometimes. Just see how much you're spending on, streaming services, and those are really the big ones. Like, I mean, it's amazing how much money people spend on cell phones, mobile data accounts, entertainment streaming services, that if you ask them how much they spend on entertainment, they would never include any of those things in their entertainment. Or even if you ask them how much they spend on telephone, they go, well, my cell bill is $100 a month. And when you look at their cell bill, oftentimes your cell bill, taxes and everything all in, is, if you think it's 100, it's probably closer to 140. Right? And these things start to add up, and that's what causes people problems. And it really is just a question of having a good objective look at where you are and how much bringing in and how much is going out.
Yeah.
And I think with respect to this conversation, to why we first started talking, is just how hard that is, that constant financial worry, just what kind of an emotional stress that is on relationships, on people, on just your day-to-day life. And it can lead to things like it's poor eating habits, bad sleep because you can't sleep at night. That's going to lead to poor health. That's going to lead to all of the kinds of negative outcomes that are can be very serious and can be very long term, and can really have a significant negative impact on your ability to maintain relationships. And it's needless because you can control it. It's one of the things that you can actually objectively look at and put a plan together and say, okay, diets are hard to stick to, right? Exercise programs are hard to stick to, because you can always find a cheat day. It can always be too cold to go for a run. Yeah. You can look at your financial plan and just say, okay, I'm not going to spend that anymore. It's just So, and I think that underpins a really good, one of the things that can underpin a really good foundation for good, long, healthy relationships between people.
Yeah, well, we know, I mean, there's all sorts of reports about how money stress in relationships is one of people's biggest stressors. And it's the same piece with proactive mental health, is that you need to invest in these pieces, not just for your own sake of hopefully not having those years of stress, but actually in the long run, it is cheaper. And it's the same for financial help as well. It's going to be better for you in the long run. Like, the amount that's invested if you're not doing this, the amount you have to pay out for, if you're really bad with debt and suddenly you got 6 credit cards and you're paying out, you're going to be in a really bad financial place.
And you're going to probably be in a really bad emotional place.
Yeah, and it all.
I mean, you and I were talking just before we came on about the impact of emotional issues and stress on businesses, on employees, and just how, you know, we do a lot of group business, a lot of group and benefits business, and the focus for a lot of group benefit companies, a lot of insurance companies now, is proactive emotional and mental well-being, because there is a graphic somewhere that basically shows that, I believe, starting around 2013, emotional stress and stress leave basically became the biggest reason for long-term disability for workers, and was a huge cost to business and to the economy and to the individual to be offered something that's like an invisible killer, an invisible disease, which is stress. And then you can work that back to what's causing that stress. Why are people feeling that in the workplace? Why are they feeling? Why are they feeling big? The only thing that we talk about people's houses being their greatest asset.
Yeah.
But for the vast majority of people, the greatest asset is their ability to earn an income.
Oh, definitely.
And if you are finding yourself in a position where you can no longer work because of emotional stress, because of mental stress, because of physical injury, you've basically lost that greatest asset, that thing that's going to drive you and get you to that point where you can get to your goal of spending your money.
Totally.
And so it's you know, it's incumbent on companies to make sure that they offer those services to their employees, but it's also incumbent on employees to make sure that they're doing everything they can to say, okay, I'm going to remove everything that I can that could possibly cause me stress, cause me mental anguish of any kind, and that allows them to become a much more productive and healthy worker and member of society and partner and you know, family member. So it's critical.
Yeah. And one of the points you just mentioned, which I think is also important to acknowledge, though, is I think we have this North America, we have a very individualistic view of everything, right? So, it's your job to handle stress in your life. And it's entirely, outside of what's happening, right? So, pieces like socioeconomic, what's happening in your work, if you've maybe been asked to take over pieces that are not realistic, and how much extra you have to do in that place. There's so many factors that play into that too. And one of my beliefs is that, workplaces should actually be taking not just proactive, as in making sure that people have benefits to go see a psychologist a couple times a year, but actually working with their employees in a consistent manner, that they're bringing in experts. Totally selfishly, I think they should bring in experts who do this kind of work with their employees, but in a genuine way, that these aren't just pieces that, one-off, say you're stressed, go to the therapist once and you're done. It's a consistent practice, right? Same way you're putting money aside in the bank every week.
I agree. I think there's I've managed businesses that had, over 100 employees, and when you start to get that number of people together, clearly you're going to have a range of issues, and the cost to the business of having 8% of your workforce that's let's just pick a number, that's struggling emotionally or financially or physically with something, is a huge cost to the business, and it really is in the business's best interest to say, how can we work with our employees to try to make sure they're able to maintain work, they're able to maintain their actual, coming to work and then being productive while they're here. And that's I think most larger organizations recognize that, I guess the question is always how well or how effectively are they addressing it?
Yes, the whole
Right.
idea of intentions of a company to take care
Yeah.
of their employees and the actual impact of did they take care and,
Right.
and what did they put in and what worked.
And why? And then
Why?
how was that
Yeah,
how was that whole decision made? How did they determine what services they brought in and who they brought it in and why? And is it really a priority for the company, or is it something that they just like to talk about and tell their employees? Because employees know.
oh, they definitely, you can tell
Yeah.
people can tell when something's genuine. Well, one of the pieces I've been supporting companies with recently as well is, when you're talking about stress, I think the stat's something like 500,000 Canadians miss work every week from various chronic illness, which, like you said, the majority of that is stress based.
Yeah.
And companies now are remote, a lot of them, or they're partially remote, or they're trying to figure out what this looks like for the next 6 months, like everyone else. And employees are probably stressed in different ways, right, as they're living at home. And I think, if anything, unfortunately, it's gone the opposite way of, this is such a weird time. It would have been great if the employees had more support than usual. But I think in a lot of ways it's been the opposite, because companies are just trying to get through. They're trying to keep things going while they're online, or they're trying to adapt to these new systems.
Yeah. You can, again, it takes it takes a different kind of person to be effective in working from home, working remotely. It's not just a matter of setting up your computer at the dining room table or in your home office and then plugging away like you would at the office. I would venture to say that most people do not function as productively in that setting as they do in an office setting. It's just
Totally.
it's just is what it is. And so to the extent that business can actually provide some level of support for people who are working remotely now, who are not necessarily well adapted to working remotely, I think is something that they need to deal with, not just because of COVID, but even post COVID, because people are going to want to stay working from home.
Yeah, that's most.
And yeah, and they're going to have to come up with some strategies and ways to support those people outside of just the regular job duties as the employer. So yeah, I think it's very important.
Yeah, the pieces I've seen recently have talked about most employees want a mix now, right, of some time in the office and some time at home, which is great if it's very intentional and can be accommodated. But you're totally right about, it's not just people sitting at the office table or the dining room table being as effective as they were in the office. I think there's a huge piece of boundaries, first of all, because that's something I've also talked about a lot of people with. What's the boundary of home and work life when you're always in the same place? How do you make that? And also, though, the piece of inefficiency, I think, can be a weird balance, because when you were in the office, there was an inefficiency of, every half hour you'd go to the coffee room and pour yourself a coffee and gab for 5 minutes with your friend. Now that part's not happening anymore, so it's in one way more efficient, but without that contact with people don't get inspired to do the work. They don't work effectively in the same way they did.
Yeah, and I think I think it's easy to say that those water cooler or coffee or break room conversations are not efficient, but you can, as someone who ran businesses and went to the break room a lot, you can, as a manager, there's a lot of sort of dotted line connections you can make with people who might not be sort of a direct report, that you can get a lot of really interesting feedback about your business and about your employees that way, and employees interacting together in that way. A lot of times there's sort of a very informal collaboration that takes place that doesn't take place over Zoom. I spend my life on Zoom, and we have lots of regional Zoom meetings, and there's not it's not as interactive as Zoom would like you to think it is. It's easy to turn your camera off, mute yourself, and do something else while this is going on. And I do it. I know other people do it. It's not necessarily the best. And then how really effective is that for your business over time? And that's and how rewarding is it for your employees over time? I mean, that's another issue. So
totally. Well, and that's the impact of not having taken that time and intention and support to get to a place where you can be intentional and say, this is how we're supporting maybe those previous coffee room talks in a different way. So
yeah, exactly.
I realize we're coming to the end, and I really appreciate what you've said, both about, be proactive, take the step to put thought into this in the beginning, make yourself, or not make yourself, but look at your budget realistically, look at what you've spent, not just on, the things you thought you spent it on, but on everything. And then also, as much as you can, using benefits, using your company. If you're an entrepreneur, seeking out things that will support that growth. Are there any final thoughts that you wanted to share with people, or suggestions you would recommend everyone go do?
Well, I think people really do. Just the first thing people need to do is get a good handle on why they're spending or planning to spend what they're spending, and what is that? What is the impact of making that decision going to be down the road on their ability to live the life that they'd like to live? I think if I really resist words like holistic, but if you're looking at it from a holistic point of view, I think that financial well-being and physical well-being and emotional well-being and mental well-being are all tied together. And if you can kind of, if they're all connected, and if one of them's not working well, it's going to impact the rest of it. And as I say, I think of all of those, the easiness, it's easy to say you're going to go on a diet or to improve your diet. It's harder to do it. It's easy to say you're going to start an exercise program. It's harder to stay on it. It's easy to say you're going to create a financial plan and stick to it and then not stick to it. But of all of those things, of all of the objective opportunities or objective goals that you have in front of you, the financial one is the one that you can look at the numbers and say, okay, this is what's happening. Here's how much I'm bringing in. Here's how much I'm spending. Here's what I'd like to do in the future. Here's how I'm going to get there. And how do I get there without destroying my relationship with my wife and my kids and my family and my employer and everybody else? So I think if people are sort of struggling to find a place to at least start grounding their lives, the first one they might want to look at is their financial situation.
Totally.
Get that one squared away, and I think a lot of the other ones will start to make sense. And I think that's really where we are right now.
Yeah. It all affects each other. It all ripples out. So, and you're in the right place, because I like holistic. That's a good word around here. Around these parts, we like holistic health, which is why you're here today. So
okay, that's good.
Anyway, it's been absolutely lovely, Mark. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. For anyone, for anyone who maybe doesn't have a financial advisor, or wants to ask questions, anything like that, we're going to make sure that Mark's contact info gets put in the chat box, so you can reach out to him, and you can always reach out to me as well. And this has been a really lovely conversation. I hope it's given people a sense of how they can put a little bit more into their financial mindset. Awesome.
Thanks, Leah.
Well, thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.